Welcome to the Special Needs Kids Are People Too podcast with Amy Bodkin, EDS. Amy is an autistic adult who also happens to be a school psychologist turned special needs consultant and public speaker. She's also a homeschooling mom to 2 autistic kiddos, a yoga instructor, a card-carrying Trekkie, and an all-around fun person. And last but not least, Amy is an advocate for seeing every child as a person, not a diagnosis. Because a special needs kid is just like any other child, just more so. Here's Amy Bodkin.
Hi, I'm Amy Bodkin, coming to you from the blanket fort in my office, and welcome to Special Needs Kids Are People Too. The 2020-2021 school year has been, it's been quite a year, hasn't it? It has been so hard in so many ways. I was talking to a friend of mine who was looking for a counselor the other day. She called 14 different offices, and only one called her back because everybody is completely overloaded right now. Change can be hard on people, and anxiety can also be really hard on people. We've had a lot of change this past year, going from procuring toilet paper and everybody homeschooling, although not exactly your typical homeschooling. Even the typical homeschoolers felt the change this year. We've had a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, and we've also had a lot of disagreements as a society about the best way to handle situations where we don't know what the best way to handle things are. All of these things are very common when we go through a lot of change. And basically what it comes down to is that every child this past year has had a disrupted childhood. And I think that for a lot of us as parents, it's left us with wondering how we can help our kids come back from this. How do we help them recover what has been lost? And the hard truth about the matter is that we can't. We can't help them recover what has been lost. At the beginning of the pandemic, I remember thinking, okay, we can come back from this. A few weeks, a month, a couple months. But as I was looking back over it over a year later, I realized, this isn't something we can come back from. I mean, yes, we can work through it. We can move forward. But we can't recover losses like that. There are once-in-a-lifetime events that are not going to come back, that are not going to be the way that we expected. It's a loss of expectations, and that's hard. And it's one of those kinds of situations where you really have to grieve the loss and work your way through the grief and the trauma. And it is trauma. A lot of times people think that trauma has to be something really serious, some kind of abuse or war, something really big. Trauma doesn't have to be big. It's not about size. Trauma is about perception. So anything that is traumatic enough that it sends your body into fight or flight, that's trauma. And it doesn't matter what the event was. It doesn't matter if other people see it as traumatic. It depends on how your body experienced the event. And a lot of autistics feel fight or flight a lot. Because our sensory pathways tend to take in information differently from everybody else around us. And so we're always kind of on edge because we're not expecting things. I think I described in a previous episode that I feel like a lot of times my life experience is like Indiana Jones taking that leap of faith and replaying that over and over and over again. I have been taking Krav Maga lately, that is Israeli self-defense. And in that class, we've been talking about states of awareness. And I had a very interesting revelation while we were learning about this. There are 4 states of awareness. There is unaware. That's when you're non-responsive to surrounding environments. This state, it's one that you are sometimes incapable of avoiding. At some point, you have to sleep, and then you're not going to be responsive to your environment. Then there is the aware state, and that's when you're conscious of your surroundings and the people in it. You're simply just aware that the world is a potentially unfriendly place, and you feel well prepared to interact in it. The next level of awareness is alert. Something seems not quite right and has your attention, and your senses have picked up a possible threat, and your mind begins to set mental triggers. If this happens, then I will do blank, and if this happens, then I'll do this. And it's at this point that fight or flight has been activated. The last one is alarm. Your mental triggers have been tripped, and you are going into action mode. What I realized as we were going through these stages is that as an autistic adult, I have spent most of my childhood in the alert, actually most of my adulthood too, in the alert stage. That is the stage where something doesn't feel quite right and you're setting mental triggers. Okay, if this happens, then I'll do this. And if this happens, I'll do that. That's the fight or flight stage. Lots of autistics have that experience. We aren't the only ones who have that experience. Anybody who experiences trauma has that experience. But if your sensory pathways are wired up differently, then you're probably going to experience it a lot more. That's part of the reason why we tend to have so much more anxiety. And so it creates a lot of problems. Health-wise, and then just the anxiety of it all. And it also is further complicated when people try to tell us that our experiences are not accurate because it's not how most other people experience it. And I would say this is true, especially now, post-pandemic or wherever we are at in that process now. There have been a lot of people posting like online and memes and such talking about how, oh, the pandemic has been wonderful. Think about all the skills that you've learned, all the increased time with family. And I'm not saying that we haven't had positives come out of the pandemic, but to invalidate all of the losses that people have experienced, it tends to be kind of gaslighting. And if you're not familiar with what gaslighting is, that's where people don't acknowledge or validate your feelings about your experience and try to basically convince you to question your own memory, perceptions, or judgment. And sometimes they do this out of like meanness or manipulation, but other times this happens out of unhealthiness of the individual. And I think in a lot of ways what we're seeing right now is probably coming out of unhealthiness. People really don't want to have some people want to acknowledge the griefs, and that's very important to them. And other people's response is that they really feel the need to not see the things that we've lost because it's too much. So, we kind of have to acknowledge where everybody's at on this. And it's difficult. So One thing I wanted to talk about today, though, is what's the real harm in going through a little adversity? Don't we actually need stress to grow? And we do need stress to grow. Stress from our muscles helps our bones grow to be stronger. But if you get too much stress, you can end up with stress fractures. So stress can be helpful, but not to the point that it causes, well, trauma to the bones or trauma to the person. And as far as your mental health goes, that's going to be stress until the point you reach fight or flight. Fight or flight is there to help you save yourself in an emergency situation. It's not something we want to approach on a regular basis. And there's been some really fascinating research done recently on the impacts of trauma on health. And I really honestly feel like everybody should go out and buy this book. You just should. I have recommended it to so many people. Every person I know who's read it has thought it was really fantastic. It's called Childhood Disrupted. And the lady who wrote it did an excellent job of summing up some of the research into how trauma can have an impact on us long term. And I'm going to read you a very short excerpt from it just as a teaser, because I've got to convince you guys to go buy the book because it's really good. And now for a word about our sponsors. Today's sponsors are me and a Charlotte Mason plenary. You can find out more about my advocacy work, working with parents and professionals to provide support for special needs families and children, and encouraging people to see children as people at amybodkin.com. Charlotte Mason Plenary is a homeschool company that supports children of all sorts of different types of needs with finding a curriculum that is a perfect fit for you and your family, doing it your way. Definitely check out the free 20 Principles study. It is fantastic. There are videos for Charlotte Mason's 20 Principles beginning with Children Are Born Persons, which is why she is my favorite educational philosopher. You can find out more about a Charlotte Mason plenary and check out the 20 Principles study at cmplenary.com. Here is the excerpt. In 1985, physician and researcher Vincent J. Felitti, MD, chief of a revolutionary preventative care initiative at the Kaiser Permanente Medical Program in San Diego, noticed a startling pattern. Adult patients who were obese also alluded to traumatic incidences in their childhoods. In 1990, Felitti presented his findings at a national obesity conference. He told the group of physicians gathered that he believed certain of our intractable public health problems had root causes hidden by shame, by secrecy, and by social taboos against exploring certain areas of life experience. At that conference, a colleague and epidemiologist from the CDC advised Felitti that if what he was saying was true, it had enormous import for medicine in general. He suggested that Felitti set up a study with thousands of patients suffering from all types of diseases, not just obesity. Felitti agreed. Indeed, he suspected that a wide-scale study would reveal a larger societal health pattern, a link between many types of childhood adversity and the likelihood of developing a range of serious adult health problems. The patients Felitti and Anda surveyed were not troubled or disadvantaged. The average patient was 57 3/4, were college educated. These were successful men and women with good educations, mostly white, middle class, with health benefits and stable jobs. The scientist expected that the number of yes answers on the Adverse Childhood Experiences survey would be fairly low. But the number of yes answers turned out to be far higher than anyone had predicted. 2/3, 64% of participants answered yes to one or more categories, meaning they had experienced at least one of these forms of childhood adversity before turning 18. And 87% of those who answered yes to one ACE question also had additional adverse childhood experiences. 40% had experienced 2 or more categories of adverse childhood experiences, and 12.5% had an ACE score of 4 or more. Only a third of participants had an ACE score of 0. Felitti and Anda wanted to find out whether there was a correlation between the number of categories of adverse childhood experiences each individual had faced and the degree of illness and physical disorders he or she developed as an adult. Indeed, the correlation proved so powerful that Anda was not only stunned but deeply moved. "I wept," Anda says. "I saw how much people had suffered, and I wept." Felitti was also deeply affected. "Our findings exceeded anything we had conceived. The correlation between having a difficult childhood and facing illness as an adult offered a whole new lens through which we could view human health and disease." How many categories of adverse childhood experiences patients had encountered could by and large predict how much medical care they would require in adulthood. The higher one's ACE score, the higher the number of doctor's visits they had had in the past year, and the higher their number of unexplained physical symptoms. People with an ACE score of 4 were twice as likely to be diagnosed with cancer than someone with an ACE score of 0. For each ACE score an individual had, the chance of being hospitalized with an autoimmune disease in adulthood rose 20%. Someone with an ACE score of 4 was 460% more likely to be facing depression than someone with a score of 0. An ACE score of 6 and higher shortened an individual's lifespan by almost 20 years. Felitti and Anda wondered if they were finding this strong correlation because individuals had been traumatized in childhood were more likely to smoke, drink, and overeat as a sort of self-coping strategy to manage chronic anxiety, and this accounted for their poor health. But while these unhealthy coping mechanisms were common, they were not the main explanation. For instance, those with ACE scores of 7 or higher who didn't drink or smoke and who weren't overweight, diabetic, and didn't have high cholesterol still had a 360% higher risk of heart disease than those with an ACE score of 0. The chronic stress of emotional and physical adversity these adults had experienced when they were growing up was making them ill decades later, even though they had healthy habits and lifestyles. In a few years, as we will see in Chapter 2, scientists would discover the precise mechanisms by which this early stress converted into biomedical disease. But the overall pattern was undeniable. Time, says Felitti, does not heal all wounds. One does not just get over something, not even 50 years later. Instead, he says, time conceals, and human beings convert traumatic emotional experiences in childhood into organic disease later in life. The first time I read that, it was incredibly powerful for me because I had had a lot of health problems, and I was trying to figure out why I was so sick. And someone had told me that it sounded like, based on my symptoms, that I was dumping calcium into my bloodstream. So I looked up this book and I was reading about it, and it was talking about how when we go into fight or flight, our body goes on red alert. We dump everything into the bloodstream. Our vitamins, minerals, neurotransmitters, hormones, electrolytes, amino acids, everything gets dumped into the bloodstream. And then we pee it out. And when that happens over and over and over again, then all of our body chemicals and such get disrupted and out of balance, which then disrupts the immune system. It can cause allergies, turn on latent genes, turn into autoimmune conditions, cancers, so many different things that are caused when basically, in layman's terms, your immune system is angry at you. And when we're children, our brains aren't fully developed. And I've heard it described as when we go into fight or flight as children, it's like our fight or flight system doesn't have the off-on switch yet. And so we go into fight or flight, but we can't turn it off. And so it starts this pattern in childhood of dumping all of our biochemical stuff into the bloodstream, peeing them out, developing these imbalances, which later leads to poor health outcomes. So, this can cause so many different issues, health-wise, and then we also tend to pass things on to our children too, because what we deal with or don't deal with more likely what we don't deal with often gets passed down to our children. So basically, after the year we've had, you could generalize and say that we have basically a generation of children now with special needs that need extra support other than what is typically needed for that golden average child in that golden average home with that golden average year, which was definitely not this last year. So the big question becomes, what can we do moving forward to help support our kids? I mean, none of us want them to end up with long-term health impacts due to stress. And the truth of the matter is, we can't really understand their perceptions. Things appear very different to children than they do to adults. I once knew a child whose mom had a mental health condition, and the child did not understand what was going on and thought that the mom was dying of cancer, and thought that it was a terminal illness. It wasn't, but that was how the child interpreted it. So it's been said in the book Jane Eyre that children in some ways are in a world unto their own. They have the ability to feel and to experience, and even to a degree to process those feelings. But being able to communicate exactly what those feelings are to others sometimes takes a little bit longer to develop that ability. Especially if you have a child who has any kind of language delays, that's definitely going to be the case. But it can even be the case for more typical children, and trauma can definitely make that even harder. And we're going to have a lot of kids. I mean, their worlds have been turned upside down. We have kids who, one day they were going to school, the next day they weren't going to school. Then they never saw their classmates again for the rest of the year. They never saw their teachers again for the rest of the year. They didn't get a chance to say goodbye. We had kids who had activities canceled. Expectations for activities and for school were taken online. And they were being run by people who had never done that kind of thing online before. We had children who spent the pandemic in lockdown with unhealthy family members, with abusive family members. We had children who lost once in a lifetime life experiences. Some of those milestones in childhood don't come again. You get one chance at them. We had adults, and sometimes very young adults still, but we had adults who missed opportunities. Weddings changed dramatically. Confirmations, bar mitzvahs also changed dramatically. So many graduations. Going to college, being able to visit a college, all of those once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. They don't come back. You can't give them back. Not to mention the lack of security. I mean, how scary is it when you have lived in a home where you've always had food and toilet paper, when you hear adults talking about how there's no toilet paper on the shelves and there's no food on the shelves in your grocery store? That can be terrifying to children, especially if they don't have confidence in the adults in their lives to take care of what needs to be taken care of. And even if you live in a nice home, have plenty of food in your fridge and your pantry, that does not guarantee that your children feel like you will handle everything that needs to be handled. Kids are very good at picking up on when we're not dealing with our stuff. We've got stuff, and when we don't deal with it, our kids know it. They can tell. So, as far as what we can do to move forward and support our kids, the first thing we need to do is deal with our stuff. Everybody has baggage. And when we don't deal with our stuff, it gets passed on to the next generation. Sometimes we pass things on unintentionally. Habits in the way that we interact with others, ways of treating people that are acceptable in one family, but maybe aren't the healthiest. One of the things I like to tell parents often is that every step you take is one less step your kids have to take. It can be so hard to do the work of dealing with your stuff. It's hard. But good parents will do whatever it takes to give their kids the most supportive environment that they can, so that they don't have to go through as much as their parents went through. So the first thing that we can do for our kids is to do the hard work of acknowledging our own feelings and dealing with those feelings. See a counselor, get a family therapist. I tell everybody, I think every single family should have a family therapist on call. You never know when an issue is going to come up, and you never know when your own background and your own blindnesses are going to cause you to maybe overcorrect. And having someone you can talk to about those situations and go, hey, this is what I'm planning on doing. Am I overcorrecting from my own past experiences? We don't want to swing too far to one side because things were too far to the other side when we were growing up. We want to hit that sweet spot in the middle, because that sweet spot in the middle is where we're healthiest. Life is all about balance. We've got extremes, and finding the balance in the middle is where we're happiest. You can be too hot, you can be too cold. When we're happy, we're in the middle. You can be too hungry, you can be too full. Happiest is in the middle. It's all about finding balance. Hydration is a balance of water and electrolytes. If you have too many electrolytes, you're dehydrated. If you have too much water, you're dehydrated. That's why a lot of people with chronic anxiety tend to be low on electrolytes. We dump our electrolytes into our bloodstream, pee them out, and then we end up with too much water and not enough electrolytes. And I actually use a recipe for a homemade electrolyte drink at my house for myself. This is not necessarily a recommendation for everybody else to go out and make it, but I take a quart of juice and add 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 teaspoon of cream of tartar, because cream of tartar is potassium, and you need salt and potassium in equal amounts to be able to hydrate well. And then I drink that until it creates a laxative effect, because those are water soluble, and I know at that point that I've had enough. And that is how I stay hydrated the best, because I tend to run low on electrolytes chronically. I went into labor with my children early because I was dehydrated, and they kept telling me to drink more water, and then I would find myself in labor and delivery because I was dehydrated. If I had known then what I know now, I probably wouldn't have landed myself in labor and delivery and distress. So it's all about finding that balance, and as parents, learning to take care of ourselves. Join me next time. We're going to be talking about the next way that we can support our kids. This will be more about figuring out how to support our children as they are working through their own trauma. See you guys next time.
We hope you had fun listening to today's episode and gained some new insights into the wonderful variety of people in our world. You can find out more about Amy's advocacy work at amybodkin.com. And remember, special needs kids are people too.